Hello, Johnny Long here. I'm in the slightly odd position of reading out an advert about how we have no adverts on Escape Collective. Now, I don't think all ads are evil, but I definitely prefer our little world to exist without them. Our website is so clean, and our podcasts are blessedly free from any messages imploring you to buy some green gloop that would definitely make its way through your system quicker than the time it took to put your credit card details in to buy 6 months worth of the stuff. The trade-off here, in order to keep things nice and pure, is we need you, yes you, the person listening, to sign up to become an Escape Collective member. That's the only way we can make this membership-funded model work. We don't have to go with our begging bowl to marketing executives like the vast majority of cycling media do. I will not drink the green goop. You can't make me. If you are already a member, thank you so much. You are appreciated beyond words. And if you know someone who's on the fence about signing up, why not give them a friendly little nudge? Hey, if we sign up enough members, maybe I will drink the green goop after all. Go to escapecollective.com/member to sign up.
Welcome back to Geek Warning, the podcast that puts all you need to know from the world of cycling tech in one place. I'm Dave Rome, and joining me this week is Brad Copeland. Brad, welcome back.
Thank you, Dave.
Brad, I've asked you about your favorite bikes that you've owned, but given that you're on the tools pretty much every day at the moment, what's the most interesting bike that's been clamped into your work stand this week?
Oh man, I've had some real doozies this week.
Doozies in a good way or a bad way?
Bad way and a good way. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go with the most probably interesting one. A little bit of a novel one was a Moots Womble. Do you know that bike? The Womble? It's kind of like
I'm struggling to remember what it is. I know the name.
It's like an aggressive
Talk me through it.
hardtail.
Right.
Titanium,
okay.
Schmoots, so
yeah,
you expect a nice quality titanium hardtail frame.
Yeah. What sort
exactly
of generation is this? How old are we?
Brand new.
Oh, it's a brand new
2024 Moots.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're kind of not a dealer like stocking, but we have the capability, and this one was cool. It's like full Chris King spec. It had like a new SRAM transmission, EXO level one. It was pretty good, but it's a solid build, all new stuff, pretty high end.
Yeah,
Hadn't seen one before. It has like 5-inch travel fork on it, so it's kind of like a do everything hardtail, but cool bike, nice bike.
You're living in the Pennsylvania area. Is that sort of a normal bike for the area? Normal mountain bike, like is a trail hardtail common?
There's a lot. I don't know. There's so many genres of bike these days. We sell a few bikes like that, though. Yes, I would say. Yeah. I wouldn't say it's super common. I wouldn't necessarily say it would be the bike I would have chosen either, but objectively, pretty cool bike. Sure. And I've always been a huge fan of Moots. I think Moots in general make some of the nicer titanium frames available these days and really forever. So, I certainly can't fault his taste. Yeah.
I had obviously, growing up in bikes, you have an appreciation for Moots, and I had at the past place of employment, the old place, we had a field test in Steamboat Springs, which is where Moots is, and they'd invited us for a factory tour, and I was going to do a photo gallery there, and then this was kind of peak COVID time, and one of our testers ended up testing positive to COVID, and our factory tour got cancelled, and I never got through the doors of Moots, and I was like all of 2 minutes away, and halfway across the world, and heartbreak. So
so close.
That's like the trip that got away. Far. Yeah.
I spent a summer in Steamboat, and I was amazed by, everybody, like even little kids and everybody. They had like weekly mountain bike races, like kind of local series events. And they have, some old World Cup ski facilities there, which are sort of like the host site and the start finish area. And little kids on up to every single person. Like everybody's riding a Moots. So it's cool that they're supporting the local titanium frame builder out there in Steamboat Springs, but lovely place.
Yeah.
Love to get
and they
back
hold
there.
they hold a great gravel event there, like a non race, unofficial race, more a fun event, and that looks amazing. I'd love to get out there one day. I think that was just on this past weekend. So anyway,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, this week we've got the usual full episode. There's a bunch of new bikes to talk about. There's a few other components we'll get to towards the end. We've got a pick one, and we've got a PSA as well. So I think we might jump in. But
buckle up, everyone.
Yeah, but before we do that, I guess for anyone listening, we want to hear from you about how we can do podcasts better. So at the moment, we're conducting our first listener survey for everyone who listens to this podcast and any other Escape Collective podcast. We want to know what you like about the show, what you think needs improvement, and what other podcasts you'd like to hear from Escape Collective. Your input helps shape the direction of this podcast itself, as well as others we create in the future. So all the information is kept private and is used for the sole purpose of making us better. Head over to escapecollective.com/survey to leave your feedback. That will help us improve. So yeah, please do. Be nice, be mean. Doesn't matter. It's all constructive. So thank you.
I've gotten some pretty good feedback recently, Dave, so far.
Oh, really?
Granted, there are people I know who probably wouldn't tell me that it was bad, but they thought we were doing a pretty good job.
Oh, that's nice. I only get negative feedback. So.
Well,
clearly one of us is doing a better job than the other.
I will say. There's a new episode right now. Time to show us what you got.
Oh, thank you, Brad. Thank you. All right, well, let's jump into some the bigger news from this week. So I'm gonna start at the biggest. Maybe this is a bit biased because I've got it here for test, but for me, it's one of the more exciting bike launches that I've seen. And it's exciting because it's basically like just rewound the clock of tech and has gone way back to basics. The new Specialized Crux DSW. So it's Specialized have brought back an aluminum Crux. Brad, have you seen this thing?
Yeah, I couldn't help but to notice it in my Instagram feed. Every single account seemed to be posting something about
Specialized has a knack
this
of
bike.
doing
Even
that.
Howard Grotz, who I don't know if you know who that is. An athlete extraordinaire across many disciplines. Even he was posting about it. So if it's in his feed, he's a bit of iconically kind of curmudgeonly Instagram user. So when I see it on Howard's feed, I know it's really pervading my feed. So yeah, very exciting bike. I've been a big fan. So okay, where do we begin here? Cool bike. I'd like to start by saying that. I don't think it's the coolest DSW series, shall we say, frame that has come along ever.
Deluzio Smart World is what DSW stands for.
Yeah,
and so I'll let you explain that. But
so you probably remember the first LA and then the LA Sprint, both the DSW moniker, which featured, I guess, most notably like a forged head tube. So with kind of like a bit of a protruding kind of stub of what would be kind of a top tube and a down tube, which allowed like some overlap of the down tube and the forged element that is the front end of the bike. To have a larger overlap and more weld contact, which essentially made the bike stiffer and more durable without, not at a great weight penalty. In fact, it was probably weight savings in there. I don't remember what the numbers and the claims were, but so it was a head tube and a bottom bracket element that was sort of the same thing, that had like the seat tube and the chain stays and the down tube sort of molded where there was like an overlapping sleeve, almost like an old lugged frame would do, but obviously out of aluminum and huge diameters and large contact surfaces. So the bikes were, notoriously crit bikes and affordable, so you could afford to crash them, which was great. And this, I think, true and great also for gravel use, where the bikes are often strapped with bags or treated in ways that aren't delicate. And so, like you said, it's a big, I would say probably the biggest bike drop of the last couple of weeks at least. And I think it's going to hit.
Which is interesting to say because it is, in theory, it's a more entry-level bike from Specialized. And it's got a bunch of geeks quite excited about it. So
yeah, and I mean, we were kind of discussing this in a previous episode about how I think there is maybe a undercurrent of interest in simpler bikes than what are commonly the highest end offerings these days. I know as a mechanic, it can be tedious. I know owning the bikes for those who aren't mechanics can be even more tedious. And I've had some good examples, and some of those popped to mind when you asked about my interesting week of bikes in my work stand, which maybe we'll talk about. But so, I think there's a little bit of a incoming backlash, or sort of like a kind of regression in a way, at least among.
I hope so.
Yeah, I do too. I think bikes are crazy expensive these days, justifiably in some ways, but if you accept the premise, which I don't necessarily, I think some of the technical features and advancements in bikes are not necessarily necessary, I would say,
or advantageous. Like they're not really bringing a user advantage. They're just
not
kind of
necessarily
there for the sake of being there. And if you're being very skeptical, they're there because it's a selling feature. But
something
2 years down the path,
2
years down the path, you're like, this selling feature is garbage. So
having worked in a bike shop for a while, and you being someone who's been around the block a time or two, Dave, imagine, even now, if I see somebody coming with a first gen SRAM Red E-Tap bike, I'm like, oh God, here we go. Any parts, it's like, And now that it's like pervading.
If it works, it works well. But
nothing wrong with it. But if you need anything for it, it's like, And that was only like 6 years ago or something like that, 7 years maybe by now.
I don't know.
8. I don't know. Time flies. Jeez, it's 2024. Anyway, it was not that long ago. But let's say, now everybody's got all these bikes, and they're already kind of like a generation old for the first generation of Axis, given that we have new SRAM Red and new transmission stuff already. And, imagine walking into a bike shop with this stuff in like 25 years. I got
for sure.
Guys walking with 25-year-old bikes now, and I'm like, awesome. I love these bikes from the mid-90s. They're so easy to tune up, and they just respond to everything perfectly, and they still work, and they're super durable, and they're made to last. And I don't really see like too many bike parts, at least not common bike parts, that I would describe that way right now.
No, there is a lot of redundancy.
To bring it full circle, is a step back towards that direction. No internal headset routing. Simple as far as internal routing goes through the down tube, nothing fancy. I would assume I haven't seen one in person, but my hunch is that it's pretty straightforward.
An English threaded bottom bracket.
Threaded bottom bracket.
A 27.2 millimeter round seat post. An external clamp. Regular through axles.
Specialized didn't reinvent another seat post wedge. I can't believe it, but no, thank God it's all common, kind of normal stuff that I think is going to be a pretty popular bike, I would expect.
For sure. So basically they've specialized, I think it was 2019 was the last time we saw an aluminium crux, which the crux being sort of like their more performance race oriented. Initially it was a cyclocross race bike. These days it's more of a gravel race bike, which can dabble in cyclocross, even though I'd argue the geometry is not as ideally suited as it once was to that discipline. In the years since, they've only had carbon fiber versions, and it's kind of been like the off-road going version of an Athos in terms of its simple design and like almost round tubes, which are really focused on weight. This aluminium version is basically like a replica, but in alloy. It looks a whole lot like the carbon version. All the features are the same. All the geometry is the same. The only notable difference, other than it being alloy and therefore heavier, is that it's also moved to a universal derailleur hanger dropout. So that's, in a sense, it's newer than the current carbon version. But otherwise, it's, if you've seen the carbon version, you've probably in a way already seen the alloy version. Specialized makes some big claims. They tend to, whenever they release a new bike, claim that it's the best at something. This one is the lightest gravel aluminium frame ever, is what they're claiming, which I can't really think of a production gravel aluminium frame that's lighter. This one's sub 1400 grams, which is pretty light for such a frame. And then they've combined that with the same fork off like the S-Works Crux, which is, so it's not this isn't a budget alloy bike, we should probably say. I mean, we're talking like, was it $3,000 for
I think 2,600 US. Oh, yeah, maybe.
You're right. Yeah,
something like that. Anyway,
that's exactly
not cheap.
Yeah,
not exactly entry level numbers.
Yeah. So 2,600 for a complete bike, 1,700 for a frame set, and there's only the one complete bike at the moment, and that comes with a Apex 1x12 Explore mechanical drivetrain. And that's the bike I've got in for test.
Well, we got off by me sort of saying I wasn't as excited about it as I wanted to be. I want to circle back about why that is.
Okay, please do.
So after having described DSW concepts just a moment ago, I will say this one is lacking the concepts that I just described. In fact, well, at least the head tube
there's
configuration. It's only around the
one
BB,
element. Yeah,
like the bottom bracket, which probably is the more important of the two elements in terms of the structural nature of what it adds to the frame and the its ability to sort of align, as it were, with the crank and BB area with what hopefully is in alignment with the rear end of the bike. But that whole structure allows that to be, I would say, more successful than, let's say, some older alloy frames. Cannondale comes to mind, where you would have some occasionally very misaligned BB30 bottom bracket shells, and that's another conversation that we could really get into down a hole on. So this new Crux DSW frame has the kind of forged element only at the down tube, bottom bracket kind of chainstay interface area, seat tube, all that area. It does not have the head tube that was so, it was kind of what got the ball rolling with this whole DSW concept in the first place. So I kind of missed
that head tube. Yeah, I mean, that head tube you described, that DSW head tube, is present on the current LA Sprint as well, which came out a few years ago. And I reviewed that bike, and it was very polarizing. A lot of people thought that head tube with the welds kind of midway through the tube were pretty ugly. And, for me, I thought it was like, I mean, it wasn't pretty, but I kind of appreciated it for the design difference that it offered. It was like...
Same.
Yeah, it doesn't
I felt exactly
like
the same.
Every other frame out there.
Yeah.
But yeah, this one does keep things simpler. It does just have like, a typical sort of mitered tube to a more regular head tube. But then that down tube is one piece all the way through to the bottom bracket junction. And then they weld the chainstays and seat tube onto that. And then within that sort of like molded bottom bracket junction sits a bottom bracket shell that they've actually then welded in place within that. So it's kind of like a shell within a shell. And yeah, I think... it's an interesting design. I mean, certainly they're trying to do it to save weight and to optimize stiffness with reduced weight. But I think time will tell whether the design they've done collects dirt or anything like that, because it's quite an open shelf.
Right. It's always fun to discover what collects and how and where inside these frames when you get to dig through them. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess the main takeaway of this bike is that people like us get so excited for a bike that basically removes all the features, then I think it's a pretty good sign that maybe the bike industry as a whole needs to look at what features are actually adding value to the consumer and what are just purely sales features that might not actually be in the best interest of the customer. And I think while Specialized is charging a premium for what is effectively quite a basic bike, I think they do deserve kudos for actually understanding that people want simplicity. And they're one of the few brands, which is crazy to think, but they're one of the few brands that's actually offering a simple choice for people that want it.
I agree. So, I think it's going to be a hugely popular bike. We sell Specialized at my shop, and it's a kind of bread and butter bike for the type of bikes we sell a lot of in the category. So I'm pretty excited about it for that reason. And I think in general the industry kind of forces some stuff on people who aren't really ready to have it, and it makes owning and operating a bike, if you're like new to cycling, kind of overwhelming, actually. That's the concern that I have with some of where we're going. And I think there's definitely room for it at the high end. And there's a certain tier of customer who wants to, it's like buying a certain car, it's like, wow, this is great, except that, I have to pay somebody a lot of money to keep it going. And if that's not something you're willing to do, and I think for a lot of folks in the middle of the market kind of price points, they're not really looking to spend a fortune and have their bikes constantly in the shop being worked on. And unfortunately, I feel like the way bikes are going, both they're a little bit more complex. Working on them is difficult because of the routing of things, and it's just not really approachable to people who are new to it. And I feel like that's my number one concern. I feel like this bike might resolve a lot of that for people who, that very customer who's maybe not willing to spend 12 or 15 grand on a, high end super Gucci gravel bike, but just want something they can live with and ride daily and not
which is too much most of us.
Most of us. Me, I mean, I have that other bike too. And I much prefer living with a bike like this.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, speaking of other bikes, let's move on. And I've got 3 other new bikes on my list that have all come out within the last week or so. Some look great. Others, maybe not. Bianchi Arcadex. This bike, it was only a few years ago on a previous podcast that Kaylee and I and James awarded this bike the ugliest bike of the year. And said some mean things about it. It was pretty hideous. Bianchi have overhauled this bike now. So, and it's no longer the ugliest bike on the market. I think it looks quite nice. They've basically moved it to be a more adventure-focused bike, sort of like imagine like a Santa Cruz Stigmata or a Canyon Grizzle, that kind of bike. And meanwhile, they've got the Bianchi have the Impulso, if you're into more the racy end of things. It's room for 700 by 50 millimeter tires. There's actually a storage hatch in the down tube, which is right on trend. It's unfortunately still sticking with internal cables through the headset, but the rest of it looks pretty good. Complete bikes with Apex start from €3,000, and it's a carbon frame, so it's a bit higher end than that Crux we were just talking about. Other details, it's got a universal derailleur hanger, and it's suspension corrected geometry as well, so you can put a RockShox or Fox fork straight on the front of it. Brad, have you had a look at this thing?
I did look at this thing. So I have a question for you first before we jump into my thoughts. What is currently the ugliest bike in your opinion, if not this bike?
It's the previous generation Arcadex.
But since it's no longer, do you have a second place that might have just taken over the crown, or you can think about that if you don't have it ready to go?
I don't know. I feel like the previous generation was so ugly that there probably is no second place. You just got to go to a third place. Yeah. I think it occupies its own. Yeah, no, I actually don't know. It just had lines, like it just was quite swoopy, and it just had lines that didn't really mesh. It just didn't really flow as a bike. And it had like weird storage hatches that they couldn't really explain the purpose of. I think it was either designed as a frame that could handle e-bike purposes, like dual purpose, both analog and e-bike, or they'd put hatches in there for like Di2 that never came. But at the time, it was just like, what is this thing? So, but yeah, I mean, this new one actually looks like a
clean.
Good change.
Looks clean. So I would say this is like my least favorite category of bike of all, probably.
Interesting.
Maybe not. Maybe like fat bikes are worse, but
like gravel in general, or like adventure style gravel.
Adventure style bike packing, multi-day, whatever.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
And so
it's not my style of riding either.
Yeah. To be exciting would require a lot. I would not necessarily say this bike did that for me. It seems a little bit like it's borrowing a lot of existing ideas from other bikes and maybe making consolidating them into one bike, or putting a little Italian Celeste paint and flare on it to make it slightly different, but fundamentally the same. So that's kind of my opinion. It's a good idea. I'm not sure Bianchi's my first choice when I'm thinking about buying a bike like this anyway, but it's nice. We're talking about Bianchi a lot more than I feel like I've ever talked about Bianchi these last 2 weeks.
I mean, last week we had their factory, which is now like a eco-friendly renovated factory, and So and then this week we've got a new bike, and they've been keeping my inbox busy. Yeah,
I bet. Well, so what I will say about this one and about the previous discussion of the Crux, and about a previous podcast, as we forecast the future of gravel and all things, the UDH suddenly comment on all new gravel bike frames. And I think that's going to be something that every new bike is going to be coming equipped with now that we've seen the teasers from Unbound and the new Explorer group and the blah, 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 and the ability to run transmission mullets and this thing. So it's cool to see everybody getting on board, and I guess that sets the tone for what we're
So my understanding is that in mountain bike world, SRAM brought out the UDH being like, this is the one universal derailleur hanger and everyone should get on board with it because it's better for the customer. And I think a few brands were put into the loop being like, you should get on board with this because we're going to release a drivetrain that requires this interface. But some smaller brands were not given that information, and some were like smart enough to be like, oh, SRAM must be doing something in order to go to this effort. Some were smart enough to just be like, yeah, this is better for the customer. I don't want to have my own derailleur hanger when every other brand is using a single derailleur hanger. And then some brands were like, no, we like our derailleur hanger. Forget about it. And then SRAM released the transmission. They're like, oh no, what have we done? We've just released a bike without a UDH. So I think that lesson had been learned in the mountain bike space. And now in the drop bar world, no one is taking that chance. So like, they don't want to basically miss out on like being able to spec new SRAM when it comes out. So it does seem like everyone is kind of rushing to get a UDH compatible bike in the market. And then at the same time, it does seem like there's a big trend, especially that we saw in Unbound, of wider tires being used. So, this Bianchi being able to fit like 700 by 50 is wider than I would have guessed from the Italian brand. I mean, they've historically been a bit more traditional in that sense. A 50 mil tire within a road, within a gravel with crankset is quite competitive. I think there's some nice things about this bike. What stood out to me is that they actually are selling a bag package with the bike.
Yes. A
four-piece set.
It's
quite Euro. Yeah. Yes. You can buy a package of 4 bags that are sized to the frame, which I think is kind of a neat idea. I think it's definitely more a cyclo touring kind of offering than a true gravel offering in that sense. But I'm enjoying this bike, and I think it's a great improvement from what we previously saw with that name. So let's move on to another bike. Ellsworth is back. So I'm trying to think how many years ago it was now. I am going to say 14 years ago when I was last there. I used to work at the distributor for Ellsworth. So I know the brand quite well, and that's the truth. They've brought back the Roots, which was originally a cyclocross bike. They've now brought it back as a gravel bike. I should also say Ellsworth as a bike brand is back as well, with under the helm of the original owner Tony Ellsworth. They've brought back a new gravel bike, and it fits a maximum of a 700 by 40 millimeter tire. Bow.
They didn't get that memo.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like this shift has happened quickly, but it does feel like to release a bike with that level of, with that amount of tire width, it's basically telling the world that it's, one, you're either missed the mark, or two, you're calling it a gravel bike when it's actually an all-road bike. And I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt and say it's the latter.
Yeah, well, it's inevitably the latter. I think whether they wanted it to be or not, because of what limitations it inherently has. But I like we kind of mentioned before too. I think the gravel sector is on its way to kind of subdividing itself into many categories, and this may fall into the just barely a gravel bike category by what the potential of a gravel bike seems to be these days. So it's kind of like I guess in the Crux carbon one might have a little more tire clearance than that. But
a Crux fits a 47.
Yeah,
so,
I like a racier style gravel bike that's like not for everyday riding, for everyday ride, not for multi-day riding, where it's a little bit more of like a race-oriented, kind of performance-oriented thing. That's just my style anyway. But when it comes to how I like my personal bikes to be kind of purposeful and streamlined and not having a bunch of stuff attached to it. But for me, I never ran wider than a 40. I had an Addict, Scott Addict gravel bike until recently, and I was running 40s,
which is
on
a very
that.
racy gravel bike.
Yeah, very racy, very lightweight. I wasn't going to take it on single track and like go bombing down some wild stuff. That's what I have a mountain bike for. So for me, I kind of like that category of bike. Personally,
sure.
I actually do. But I concede to you that they maybe could have at least made 45 or 47 like kind of possible because
So I mean, this bike does look more on the road side of things as far as aesthetics go. It's integrated cabling through the headset. It's using integrated cockpit in that sense. Carbon fiber frame, probably worth mentioning, and it's it looks a little generic to me. It looks a little bit catalog-like in its shaping. It looks like something that like I've seen a dozen times already. I don't know if that's fair, but yeah.
Well, how deep should we really get involved with what Ellsworth used to be? But for me, I agree with you, first of all, and we see other brands that are sort of like Ibis comes to mind, Kona's kind of coming to mind a little bit. These old kind of iconic brands from the 90s who I guess in every one of those cases sold to some other holding company or whatever, and then
not Ibis. Oh, Ibis did, and then they're back. Yeah, sorry, you're right.
And now they're all back.
Yeah.
Kona bought themselves back.
I see
Ellsworth
where you're
bought
going with
themselves
this.
back.
Okay,
but they bought themselves back like have nothing really to do with their original stuff. It's like kind of looks like they went to the Taipei show and like pick something out of a catalog they could put their name on and call it a carbon fiber Ellsworth. You know what I mean?
I will defend Ibis in this case because I have one, but carry on.
Sorry, that Mojo SL from like 2000 and what was it, like 10 or 11 or something? That was pretty ugly thing. Sorry.
Yeah, it didn't. I actually owned one, and I was proud of it. Yeah. No. Please, offend away.
Okay.
I owned one, so I can talk trash. I owned one before they sponsored Brian Lopes, and when they sponsored Brian Lopes, they quickly brought out a new linkage, which added a ton of stiffness to the rear end. It was a flexy bike before that, and it was a pretty flexy bike after that. And also I ended up selling it because the lack of ability to hold a water bottle just killed me inside. So that's why I got rid of that bike. But it spoke to my inner weight weenie of the time.
I should also say every single one of these brands too, in their first version in the 90s, was awesome, like iconic. Like I would love any one of like their best bikes from that period of time. They're all were so good, so cool. So kind of it's hard for me to get excited about them, even if they are good objectively. It's like it's not quite the same for me. Personally.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it's nice to see Ellsworth back, but so far I haven't seen anything super compelling as to why you'd jump at one versus a lot of other options. But yeah, so anyway, if you're interested, Ellsworth Roots, you can check it out. Complete bike start from $5,500 US. But yeah, I think they've also got they do have the Truth back in the range, and they have the Rogue as well. And who knows, maybe one day they'll have an epiphany. I couldn't help myself. I'm so sorry. Niche joke.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm just trying to think of how to work in the few that I came up with, but I don't dare.
I dare you to. Okay. All right. Last on the new bikes list is OBED, OBED. They have the RVR. That's a lot of acronyms. And yeah, it's
OBED is not an acronym,
isn't it?
It's just capital letters. Huh, I could be wrong. I could be wrong.
No, I think you're right.
It's a place in Tennessee. It's a wilderness area and river in Tennessee where Lightspeed.
Oh, okay.
used to be located. And if I'm not mistaken, there's some connection between Lightspeed.
There is
and this
connection.
new OBED. Not just that Lightspeed had a model called the OBED in the late 90s. If I'm not mistaken, it was a mountain bike hardtail frame.
There's more than a connection, Brad. It's because OBED is owned by the American Bicycle Group, who also own Lightspeed and Quintana Roo.
Can't sneak anything past me, Dave.
Nope, it's basically the same company. So OBED is kind of like they're more, I guess all the bikes in the range from what I can tell are carbon fiber, and they're consumer direct as well. So it's a different business model. And yeah, I think this new RVR, it's an endurance road bike. It's got space for up to 700 by 35 tires. It is UDH, so another one on the list there that ticks that new feature box. And yeah, I guess the reason why I wanted to chat about it is it just looks like it has a pretty good geometry for the masses with pretty generous stack heights, which not enough bikes have. So I'm liking what I'm seeing with this. But yeah, this one's really more for people in the USA because of the business model, because of the location of the brand. But complete bikes start from $3,100 for a 105 mechanical, or $3,600 for 105 DO2 or SRAM Rival Explore groups. So, but yeah, Brad, I don't know if you've ever been to OBED's website, but they kind of have this cool bike builder thing that lets you configure your bike. Have you had to play with this?
I have not yet played with building my future OBED.
You probably don't need to, given you work in a bike shop that doesn't sell this. But
true.
I think it's cool. Like they obviously they're painting and assembling these bikes in the USA in house, and I think that affords them the ability. They're not the only ones to do this. There are some other brands that Ari is the other one that does a similar thing, and I'm struggling to remember what their full name used to be. What was Ari called?
Oh, Fazari.
And now
Remember?
they're just Ari, aren't they?
I forgot about that. Yeah, Ari.
Yeah. Sorry, that was a recent change, and it's already
It's
out
like
of my
Kanye,
mind. Their rebranding's clearly working because I've already forgotten the previous name. So similar idea, but yeah, they're basically assembling the bikes on demand. So you can pick like the handlebar you want. You can choose your wheel set, which changes the price. You can choose your tires. You can choose your gearing. You can choose your color of paint. So you end up getting a bike that's pretty much yours, and it's well priced as well. So I kind of like this if you're in the if you really know what you want, you know what sort of bike size you need. I quite like this as an option.
Yeah, I wish that the ability to spec your bike a little more. Specialized kind of played with this as an option for like a year, and I don't think it as a business model was to their satisfaction, and they stopped it.
It's logistically a nightmare for a big brand that's dealing with bike shops.
Yeah, of course. But it would be nice if it was less of one, because as an example that came up today in the bike shop, customer is interested in a new Tarmac, has an integrated handlebar stem front end, needs a different size than what comes stock on the size bike he would get, and we're trying to give him like a quote on what it was going to cost. I mean, it's like, you're doing some hydraulic internally routed work, brake bleeds and integrated routing to everything, and plus the cost of the new handlebar itself. I mean, you're talking like $500 probably for like,
it's not a cost the shop can absorb, that's for sure.
And then you're stuck with the random take off one piece handlebar that's not for you. And so what do you do? So there's really no way for a customer to have any experience other than that from a lot of brands who have gotten on the one piece. This is kind of circling back to our crux conversation and the revelation of a simple bike, but to have that option is really cool. So
for sure.
However you feel about this frame and whatever else, I'm excited that they give you that much room to tailor it to suit your needs, assuming what your needs are in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking like from my point of view, like if I were to buy let's use the Tarmac as an example, because I've ridden that SL8, and a 54 centimeter in that comes with a 42 with handlebar, and I think it came with a 172.5 millimeter crank. And if it were my own bike, I'd want a 40 centimeter handlebar with a 170 crank. And right away, you're looking at least $1,000 more to make those two changes. So, yeah, I mean, if the brand just offers you the ability to say, no, I want these two things, in theory, I mean, those parts are the same cost if they're installed at the factory at the same time. So, there's no additional cost to the brand, and then you get your perfect bike at no additional cost. So, I like this business model. I understand the logistics of why a brand like Giant or Specialized or Trek can't necessarily do this. I mean, they really are selling boxes in a sense, but it's but yeah, it is cool that, I guess there's a gap in the market for other brands to do this. Brad, do you have anything on your mind this week that you want to share?
Yeah, well, I do. I want to share about something I thought would never happen in real life, but it did, and it both made me frustrated, but also very happy in retrospect because I get to think about it forever. And it was a customer brought in a bike with some shifting problems and dropped the chain off the smallest cog. This is a new Crux purchased from our store not that long ago, like maybe last year, but about a year older, not quite, maybe even a year. And so, first I'm like, that's not good. Wonder what it could be. Bike kind of gets over into my hands, and sure enough, they put on a new chain, a SRAM flat top, as they're known to some chain, only to discover they put it on with the flat part on the bottom.
Flat bottom.
Yes, the quick link has an arrow on it that tells you which way the chain should be going, and it was pointing in the other direction. And as obvious as I thought it would be, see those, you just have to look at it to determine which is the top and which is the bottom. I was chagrined to discover that, in fact, it had been installed in such a way that it was not a flat top after all. So that was one that I feel like SRAM...
Flat bottom chains.
It was a flat bottom
make
chain.
The skipping go round.
It did. And but it made me think that maybe I should just at some point use this platform to remind people too, especially given, Dave, your penchant for the chain waxing. It's very popular, and chains are
I'm somewhat
directional.
Reformed. It got too popular for me.
I know, me too.
Yeah.
I tell people there's a lot more they should be looking at on their bikes than that. But anyway, that's a digression. The point is, when you are waxing your chain, if you are waxing your chain, be aware too that Shimano chains are directional as well for just about all of them in the modern era for the last 10 or 15 years. It's indicated by engraving on one side. That side faces out from the bike as you look at it in the work stand. So if you're going to pull your chain off to wax it and get that extra 0.001 watt, be sure you put your chain back on in the right direction, or you might have squandered that fraction of a watt away right away. So yeah,
I will correct you before I get inundated with emails. Most people, the benefits of waxing are not necessarily all about the friction. It's predominantly durability when you do it right. But, we understand. We know. Yeah. So I guess going back, like this is kind of, I guess this will double as our PSA for the week as well. But it's it's quite common for people to install the quick links backwards, and it's because that most of them these days have a little arrow, like Shimano as well puts a little arrow on it, and it confuses people because that arrow is meant to face forward when the chain is at the top span. So the arrow is pointing forward towards the forward of the bike when the chain is at the top, but the way the chain loops back around at the bottom, that arrow would actually be pointing towards the back of the bike when you install it.
And then it's just crazy going through that derailleur. Which way is it?
Yeah. So people do definitely get confused on this, but if you're installing the chain, at the bottom of the bike, where the derailleur is floppy, that arrow points towards the back, and then as you bring the chain around, you'll see that the arrow suddenly magically points towards the front of the bike when the chain's at the top, and that is the correct way to install it.
Yeah, the direction the chain goes when you pedal the bike. That's just all you need to know.
Yeah, and then SRAM flat top at the top, flat.
The top.
flat.
And if you had an old chain and you put a new chain on and it's doing something weird, just take a second look at it before you, drag it into the bike shop and ask why. Just perhaps. That's the thought.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, there's the other very, very common mistake is missing the little tab through the derailleur. There's like little guiding tab. Yes. That's the other super common one where you sort of link from one pulley wheel to the next pulley wheel without actually routing the chain completely correctly. And then you're just sort of grinding the chain through the derailleur. And it's like support tab / I don't know, what would you call it? Like anti-drop tab.
It's like a chain bounce prevention tab to like help guide the chain from one pulley to the next without causing it to bounce and flop off to this one side of the tooth and then derailing itself on the pulley, essentially.
Yeah.
But is it really necessary? I've always wondered that too, because it does make everything a little bit trickier.
Yeah. Well, I guess some people, they ride their bikes enough with the chain installed wrongly that they wear it away and then and then the derailleur still works. So maybe it's not necessary.
I don't want to name any names, but an athlete I used to work with one time had spent like more than a week. It was between two races where we were home, more than a week riding with it like that. And then when I packed the bike back up to go on the next trip, it was like that. And it was never even mentioned that there seemed to be anything peculiar about it.
Yeah,
but,
right.
So then that raised a lot of other questions that I had about everything. But anyway,
right.
If you replace your own chain and then suddenly something seems pretty unusual, just give it a second go. Yeah, that would be my first advice. But I would say there's more nuance to it than it seems like there should be or used to be. And people might be thinking about how it used to be to put a new chain on your bike, but there's a little bit more to pay attention to, especially electronic drivetrains and clutches and all this type of stuff you're kind of navigating on modern bikes. It's there's a little more nuance to the chain.
Yeah, they're definitely nuance and sensitivity to adjustment as well.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't take much to throw off shifting these days. So, things have to be pretty precise these days, and routing the chain backwards can cause said issues.
And the reason for the chain being directional in the first place, by the way, is to sort of interface with shift ramps on cassettes and shift ramps on chainring on the backside of your big ring to pick the chain up and stuff like that. That's why that's the premise of all of this, just for those listening. It's to clean up the shifting, make it crisper and perhaps quieter. It's been going on since sort of, I would say probably 7 or 8 speed days. You really started from that era on to now. It's just more and more refinement in that department that has led us to now having chains that are not unidirectional like they used to be, and kind of require some special paying attention to make sure that everything is accurate again, because even though it's a little thing, it does matter and does make a difference, and you can actually notice it. So,
for sure, yeah, be
aware.
All right, a good PSA, a good on your mind. Brad, I want to do a pick one, which may be quick, it may not be, but I want to do a pick one of Greece. Which is this is the Geek Warning podcast. I mean, people are like, Greece? Really? You want to talk about Greece? But if you could only have one tube of grease in your toolbox, which one would you be picking? And I will let you get a little bit more nuanced than this and explain that you might want other things other than grease. But one grease. Say you're a home mechanic, you just want one grease to use across the bike, bearings, installing press fits, installing threads, whatever it may be. Do you have a grease that you love?
Motor X Bike Grease 2000. Sometimes.
Oh my, that's
I'm pretty
mine.
sure.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it could also be the same exact grease as Durace Special Grease, Shimano branded, but exactly the same stuff.
I have never seen anything that makes me think otherwise on that.
No.
So,
and if you have a Shimano derailleur and it hasn't been in my work stand before, chances are there's a huge glob of it on either end of the spring inside your derailleur for a rainy day, because they use a ton of it where the spring kind of loops around on the parallelogram of the rear derailleur, and you have just an excessive amount. I used to harvest it and collect it on new derailleurs and just keep using it. I had this never-ending grease tub. It was a thing at my old bike shop. If Greg Thomas is listening, he's been mentioned before. He'll know what I'm talking about. I still have it. Years later, it collected so much.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a passion. But to your point, I don't have to choose just one, and In fact, I have about a dozen options on my workbench at any moment, but that's a good grease for everything. It really, truly is. There are some greases that are thicker that are more for like preventing incursion of water into things. There are some that's very, very thin for fast bearing performance. For bearing stuff, specifically ceramic speed, they're kind of saying the quiet part out loud by offering all these lubrication and grease products. I think that's where a lot of the speed really comes from. When you see, I mean, I've gotten a lot of attention for some of the bottom bracket tuning that I've done over the years, where you have them spinning and spinning and spinning. Most of that is from seal drag or the absence of seal drag, and which you can achieve by using a razor blade at on your own seals if you wish, removing them altogether if you want to. Certainly using lightweight greases or even sometimes oils if if you're handy with your bike, you might only get one ride out of it, but it'll feel amazing. And but you can kind of tune these like a standard BB, for example, with some little tricks like this, using some nice low friction, very low viscosity greases. Ceramic Speed makes one. They used to call them time trial grease. They may have rebranded it under a new name, but it's like a very
they've got. I think it's now Race Day or something.
Race Day grease, yeah. That's like it's almost like you put it on your fingertip and just your body temperature warms it to like an oil. It's like it almost breaks down like that. It's so thin. That's a wonderful one. I used to use that on like suspension pivot bearings and everything because we were servicing them so often that you never had to worry about it like displacing and the amount of time that would happen between service. So I would use that everywhere. That's a really good one for bearings specifically. But yeah, that Motor X grease, it's like a kind of lime green clear grease that is prevalent on all like
sticky
OEM.
Side.
A little sticky, but it's good in the bearings for like long lasting stuff. It doesn't get squeegeed away on like BB spindles when you put it through your bottom bracket bearings as you install a crank spindle, whatever. Even at a seat post, it's if you're not on carbon stuff, it's good there too. So I keep like a syringe of that. That's kind of like my go-to assembly grease and like everything grease. And then for like special bikes and projects, I use some different stuff that's maybe a little more purposeful in its intent.
Yeah, so that Motor X bike, what is it? Bike 2000?
Bike Grease 2000. What a great name.
Yeah. I mean, that's and Shimano Special Grease is basically the same thing from what we can tell. So I mean, if you find Shimano Special Grease, it is a more expensive way of buying it, but Motor X isn't easy to find everywhere. But it's really good, and I like it because it's I mean, the properties we spoke about, it's waterproof, and it's also sort of known to be non-reactive with anything on a bike. Like you pretty much like never hear of horror stories related with using it and getting like seal swelling or anything like that. And then it's also, I've never known it to stain paint, where there are some greases that have like red dyes in them or similar that actually have been known to like seep out of headsets and leave like staining on paint or under clear coats. So this stuff is really well proven at this point. I mean, it's been in the market for decades, and it's I mean, the fact that it comes pre-installed inside like every Shimano hub out there is probably proof that it's...
Every crank spindle has a huge glob of it in there on a Holotech type crank. Yeah, it's they don't hold back either. It's just like they're just like, here we go, let's get it old.
Yeah, there's no shortage of it, is there?
So if you're crazy, you can harvest it and keep your grease tub going for infinity.
Yeah,
that's
I feel like Fox Suspension had been watching Shimano all these years overdo it on the grease and be like, all right, hold my grease tub, and then went at it for the air pistons. So
I know what you mean.
Very good. All right. So I guess if you can only have one grease, that's the one. I still would recommend probably owning something like a blue Loctite for a lot of threads where you don't want things to vibrate loose. I'd still recommend owning an anti-seize. It doesn't need to be anything specific, but still recommend an anti-seize for like threads into dissimilar materials that you might ignore for a long time. So there's a lot of those on a bicycle, and then carbon paste is also good to keep around if you're a home mechanic or a pro. Then carbon paste for like handlebars and seat posts are pretty handy. So and that is probably, will cover most bases. You probably also need like a thin grease for free hub bodies, or suspension. But now we're getting into the weeds, and I'm going to
yeah. Come on, we're not all doing that stuff at home, Dave. Not like you.
Yeah. Well, you are, but
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, me and you, but
sure. Okay.
That's why we're shouldering the burden for all these folks here on this podcast.
Very good. Very good. All right. There's 2 remaining news items. Another product that you might have had your hands on working at a specialized dealer, Brad. Roval Rapide CLX II team wheels. These have just come out. There's only 1,500 pairs available. Brad, have you seen these? Do you know what's going on?
I haven't actually had my hands on these yet. I have to say, we haven't seen not these special edition ones anyway. I've always had good experience with the Roval wheels for the most part. I think Roval has always struggled as a wheel brand to crack the not specialized side of the market. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I always considered it tacky to see a bike that had Roval wheel set that wasn't a specialized kind of, I hate to say it. They actually, when I was working at Specialized a few years back now, there was like a marketing effort to present Roval on other brands of bikes. So there was like a period of time in the headquarters there in Morgan Hill, California, where there was like a line of all these other bikes that weren't specialized, which was like so crazy to see in there. It's like 100 bikes of like Ellsworth tarmac after Ellsworth tarmac. That's all you see, and then it's like randomly weird other bikes.
And other wheel brands associated with big brands have done that. Like Arcadex made a big effort. Like all the bikes on their website for a while weren't giant, and then Bontrager as well, I think has played at that as well in the past. So it's not a unique issue to Specialized, but it's a common occurrence.
And it's been tough to shake it. And but I used to use their wheels all the time because we were, sponsored by Specialized, sponsored by Roval. We had all that stuff, and it was all very good. The weights of these is pretty compelling. It's not crazy, but it's not bad.
Yeah. So I guess to tell about it, so it's basically the Rapide wheel is the aerodynamic wheel. It's a front and rear specific rims, approximately in the 50 millimeter front and 60-ish millimeter rear. I don't actually have those exact numbers. Off the top of my head, I think it's 48 and 62, but I could be wrong, so please don't demand a corrections corner. They basically, the team edition is, it looks much like the existing Rapide wheel, but they've got a new layup in the rim, which saves a bunch of grams. They've got a new hub, which ditches the aero profiling of the current hub, but shaves weight, makes it silver. And the outcome is they've shaved off 130 grams off the regular 1,500 gram weight of the Rapide wheels. It's the new hubs, new rim. They've also updated the spoke to a DT Swiss Aerolite 2. So they're claiming there is a marginal aerodynamic benefit with these wheels. It's pretty small. It's basically within the rounding error of wind tunnels. The outcome is US $3,800 wheel sets. And as I said, limited to 1,500 pairs. That price does seem very high, and it is, but you do then get a bunch of things. You get in the packaging, there's some pretty fancy packaging to celebrate that you've bought a limited edition set of wheels. You get things like a set of tires, you get a Dynaplug, you get wheel bags, you get spare bearings, you get spokes. I think there's some bottles in there. So, you recoup some of the costs through such said accessories. But,
But a spoke's $1.
Yep. You get an extra free hub body you won't use because you only need the one. You get the other free hub body. Yeah, exactly. So, there's no way around it. This is an expensive version of a current wheel set, but they have saved weight. And for me, I think the thing that stands out is that when I reviewed the new SRAM Red Axis, and it's got quite a lot more silver in it than previous generations, I said that this would be the kind of the catalyst to a lot of brands bringing silver back once again. And these hubs in these Roval wheels are silver. seemingly to match. So, keep an eye out for an increasing number of silver parts. Last on the list, there's a recall. Kuat, am I saying that right, Brad? How would you say it?
I would say Kuat.
Kuat.
I don't know if I'd say Q, but
Kuat.
That's just what I would say.
Okay. The rack brand in
nice
LUS.
racks.
Yeah. Bike racks, they have a recall that impacts approximately 86,000 racks. That's
got to be all of them.
This is a lot. So yeah, it's racks sold between October 2020 through to June 2024. It's the Transfer V2 1 bike, the Transfer V2 2 bike, and the Transfer V2 3 bike. Anything with the batch ID from 2045 through to 2414. So just check your ID, and if you've got a rack that is impacted by it, contact the company. They will send you a free replacement pivot pedal assembly, because apparently that pivot assembly was allowing some racks to drop down and grind away.
That's like the only thing a rack is supposed to not do, basically.
Well, I mean, I've had bikes fall off of, not this brand of bike rack, but I've had bikes fall off of other racks, and it's never a good feeling. And no matter, even if you do overlay said video with songs from Tony Hawk PlayStation game, it's still not quite the same. So it's
better though.
It makes it better, but still, it is a horrible feeling to look back and not see the bike that you've been panically looking at for 3 hours of the drive. So,
well, good on you, Kuat. Good luck with that. 86,000. Yeah. That's a bunch.
It's a lot of racks. Yeah, I mean, it shows that they've been quite successful though to date. Like that's I mean, that's a
we sell them.
rack.
They're very popular. We sell them at our shop. We actually had a customer who bought one this weekend who brought it back, and some element of it that was like related. I'm wondering if it is this issue. It didn't fall off their car, but they were just installing it, and there was a assembly that sort of broke and kind of fell out of the hitch part of the rack. I wasn't involved in this. I was sort of like watching it from across the room and listening, but now it makes me wonder if it was related to this at all, because I just heard about this recall like yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, this recall is impacting racks that are being sold currently in market. So I'd assume if you're buying a rack today, then a shop would have updated it already. But definitely check your batch ID and get onto that. So I mean, that's this episode. But I guess I'm just going to give a little plug for what I'm doing tomorrow. I'm jumping on a plane and heading off to Melbourne for the Handmade Bicycle Show Australia, which is now called Spoken, and that's running this weekend in Melbourne. Out of Seaworks in Williamstown. So if you're in Melbourne, you're listening to this, come on by. It's my favorite show to cover. It's a hand-built, handmade, custom bike show that has some of the most lovely bikes in the world, and they're really nicely displayed in a nice open glass theater kind of room. And I like it. Come chat with the builders, and I owe you a high five if you see me. So
we are lucky in the United States to have a similar show. Some of the most interesting solutions to problems you may not have really thought about are present on these bikes. They're really some amazing stuff. So if you ever have a chance, if you're close to a handmade show, whether you're in North America, and go to the North American Handmade Bicycle Show down there in Melbourne. Let's go check out Spoken. Yeah. So so the one you're mentioning, Brad, is now Made, is the big one in the US. You can't keep it straight.
And there's actually a Made Australia happening again in Melbourne in 2 weeks' time. So there's competing handmade shows in Melbourne, and my goal is to head to them both. But I think the main takeaway with these shows, and certainly keep an eye on escapecollective.com for my coverage. I'll be doing full galleries from the show, but the main takeaway is that a lot of these custom builders are building things for customers who can't necessarily find exactly what they want in the market, and it often is a result of maybe the customer or the builder sort of seeing trends and reacting to trends before other bigger brands have. So you sort of historically we've seen, out of this Australian show, for example, we saw the first 3D titanium printed lugged bike through Bastion. We've seen Prova do some pretty wild things as far as like polishing titanium underneath paint, but also like, again, integrating 3D titanium printing in ways of like fitting a 50 mil gravel tire within a gravel bike before anyone else did. Last year we saw dropbar bikes with UDH derailleur hangers before any major brand had done it. So yeah, keep an eye on these galleries because they often offer some insights into what big brands are about to copy. So yeah, I think that's for that reason alone, it's worth looking at. And then other reason to look at it is just some of these bikes are absolutely gorgeous. So if you like bikes, you'll probably like this coverage and the show.
Yeah, have fun down there, Dave. That sounds like a good time.
Thank you very much. All right, Brad. I think that's that wraps up this week. Just our usual shout out for our members. Thank you for any member of Escape Collective. Thank you for subscribing and for supporting what we do and allowing this podcast and everything else we do at Escape Collective to exist. And if you're not a member, then please consider joining. Your support does help this podcast to exist. It helps our other podcasts to exist. It helps us create the content that we want to create and that we think needs to be created. So yeah, head to escapecollective.com/member and join. All right. That's this episode. Brad, it was great to see you. Great to hang out.
Always a pleasure, Dave.
Until next week.
See you later.
I'll see you soon.